we first open up 3ds Max, this is what you'll see. In the middle of the screen there are 4 panels giving 4 views on your scene. There's a front view, a top view, a left view, and a 3D perspective view. Around that scene there are various icons and menus and tabs which we can use to edit and create our scene. Today we're going to do a simple scene where what's called a biped, or a little skeleton, falls through and bounces off some spheres. We're going to work initially in the front view panel. So click with your left mouse button on the front view to activate that window. We'd also like a little bit more room to maneuver here, so why don't you click on the scroll wheel on the mouse while you're in that window and hold it and drag down so that we're actually moving that view and we can see a little bit more area above the ground level here on that window. Now let's create a few objects inside that view. To create objects we use the panel over on the right hand side of your screen, in particular the Create button. So make sure that that's selected and then ensure that you've clicked on Geometry. If you've done that, then you'll see the various objects that we can create in that scene. We'll just create a sphere. So select Sphere, and then by just clicking and dragging we can actually create spheres inside that scene. So we'll create a sphere there and maybe a smaller sphere there. Now if you're not terribly happy with the spheres, you can delete them. Up on the top of the screen you'll see your icon bar there, so click Select Object first up, and if you're not happy with one of those spheres you can select that sphere, might select this one, and just press delete on your keyboard and that will disappear. Then you can select sphere and create a replacement sphere for that one. I might put one just here, it's about the same size. Okay. Now if we're wanting to move a sphere, we select Object and then we have a Move tool which we can click, and that gives us some tools here which we can use to move objects around on the screen. In this case just in the front view there, but you'll notice that they're also moving in the other views as well. Okay, now let's create the biped character. So once again select Object just to clear all our other selections, and on the right hand side here in our Create panel you'll see there is a little icon for systems. It's like 2 little cogs. Click on that and you'll see that biped is one of the things that we can create. So select biped with your left mouse button and then just do a click and drag to create a little biped character. It's quite small at the moment, but that doesn't really matter. Once we've created that character, we can then start working with the animation. To animate this we need to use the Mass FX tools. So go back to the icon bar at the top and click Select Object so that we can click around without creating more bipeds. And along the icon toolbar here, just go to a grey area that's not yet used and right click on that, and a menu will pop up which gives you all the different toolbars that you can actually add. We want to add the Mass FX toolbar, so roll down to that and left click and it'll create a Mass FX toolbar for us to use. Now the first thing we want to do is to make sure that the spheres are rigid, solid objects. So select one of the spheres and over on the Mass FX toolbar click the Solid Sphere, Solid Object tool, and that will actually add a modifier to that which makes it into a rigid body. We also want that to be still and not move, so over on the right hand side of the screen under the rigid body properties you'll see rigid body type is dynamic. Click next to the word dynamic and select static, which means not moving. Okay, so that's the first sphere dealt with. Now let's try the second one. Select the second sphere, turn it into a rigid body and make it static. Okay, so that's the spheres organised. Now we need to do something with our little biped character. So we need to select the biped character first, and we need to make sure we select the entire character. So up on the toolbar here, you'll see there's a sort of a dotted rectangular shape. Click on that so that we can select regions. And then click and drag to select the biped character. And he should become white like that. Now we want to turn him into a rigid body modifier. But we want to create a character rigid body modifier. So on the Mass Effects toolbar, click on the little character. Once we've done that, we can then deselect that character by clicking somewhere else on the screen, and we can begin to play our animation. One further thing though we need to remember to do before we do that is to tell the system to stop the animation at a certain time. So on the Mass Effects toolbar, you'll see that there's an icon on the far left. Click that one there and we get a new tool panel come up, which gives us a whole bunch of new tools to use. Now up on the top there's a tab there for simulation tools with the little spanner and the hammer on it. Left click on that for me and you'll see another panel appear with a little very thin scroll bar at the side, which is a bit hard to see, but click and drag that one down and we'll click stop simulation on last frame so that it will in fact stop the simulation when it gets to 100 frames in this particular case. Okay, now we're in the position to play our simulation, so we can close the Mass Effects tools and click the play button on our toolbar, and this is what you will see. Man falls, bounces off that sphere, bounces off the other sphere, and the physics in the system will cause him to fall to the ground and crash, and you'll see that it's ticking along the frames on the bottom, and at 100 frames it will stop. So we've created a little character falling through some spheres. If you're not terribly happy with the way it went, go back to the beginning and we can actually move that sphere. I'd like him to fall through them a little more, so I'll make sure I've got selected. I'll click on that sphere, I'll click on the move icon and I'll just move that sphere across a little bit. Hopefully it'll fall a little bit differently now. Okay, so let's play that and see how that looks. Okay, it's tumbling through them now, that's good. That works well, I like that. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Now, once we've actually got it working, we now need to record that. Now in Autodesk, that's called baking it. So once again, we'll select on the Mass Effects toolbar, the tools, and in the simulation tools, we will click Bake All. And that will have the effect of running through the animation, but this time it actually records it and remembers it. And then it will finish at the 100th frame. You can change that later, but we won't worry about that too much. Once we've done that, we now have an animation that we can actually work through and record, and later on actually play back and work with. To run through it, you'll see at the bottom there there's a timing ruler, and at the top of that there's a controlling block, so we'll just click and hold on that and we can drag that along and we can run through the animation, run it back and check that, and that allows us then to render it later on, in other words create it. Okay, now we've got that organised, let's close the toolbars and the panels. And we'd like to probably watch that in something a little bit like 3 dimensions. So to do that, look at the perspective window here. Click with the left mouse button in that perspective window to select it. And then on your keyboard, hold down the Alt key, which is near the bottom of your keyboard. And while that's held down, press W. And that will have the effect of bringing up the perspective window as one big window. When you've done that, you might need to click in that window, but then use the mouse wheel to move back in your animation and click on the scroll wheel and just move that into a position that's suitable. Maybe scroll that in a bit. Okay, so we've got ourselves organised here, and then we can actually play our animation. Now once it's been baked, we don't need to re-record it, so we can just use the little play button down on the bottom of the screen there, play animation, and we'll see our animation being played through. And it cycles through that endlessly if we don't stop it, so we go back to the beginning. Or alternatively, you can just run through it yourself by dragging the controller backwards and forwards. And that's how we might use the physics in Autodesk 3ds Max to create a very simple animation. And once that's been created, we can then render it and work with it and improve it and gradually get it ready to record as a character animation.